The Pentagon never expected that. The White House never thought it would happen. But it did, live on national television. With the world watching, Ghana's president looked the nation and the world in the eye and delivered the sentence that would rupture decades of quiet military dominance. Ghana will no longer host, support, or participate in U.S. military operations. Just like that, America's most stable partner in West Africa closed the door. No prior warning, no negotiations, no sugarcoating, and within hours, classified channels lit up from Washington to Stuttgart. Africa Command scrambled for answers. U.S. diplomats were told to stay calm. But beneath the surface, the truth was clear that America had just lost Ghana. So, what happened behind closed doors? What intelligence forced Ghana's hand? Was this about sovereignty, or did Accra uncover something far more dangerous? Because this isn't just a policy shift, it's a revolt, a message, and maybe the match that sets the entire U.S. military presence in Africa on fire. In this video, let's break it down. When President Mahama made his national address, it wasn't just another speech buried in diplomatic language, it was a thunderclap. Calm and deliberate, he said what African leaders have long whispered behind closed doors, but never dared speak publicly, that Ghana would no longer participate in U.S. military operations and would shut down all American bases on its soil. That declaration hit harder than any battlefield ambush. That's because Ghana has long been considered the quiet backbone of U.S. strategy in West Africa. With Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all either hostile to or disengaged from Western forces, Ghana became the last remaining stable ally, home to airfields, intelligence assets, surveillance posts, and special forces training programs. To see that ally suddenly pull the plug, without leaks, without warning, was more than surprising. It was a tectonic shift. Interestingly, President Mahama's use of the word complicit sent a chilling message. It implied that Ghana had been used, that its sovereignty was not just compromised but actively exploited to carry out missions that had nothing to do with Ghanaian security. In the same breath, he made it clear this was about reclaiming agency, not hostility. The country would no longer allow itself to be a pawn in wars it didn't choose. And the reaction from Washington was fast, but cautious. Officially, the U.S. Embassy expressed deep disappointment and asked for clarification. But beneath the surface, the Pentagon was in damage control. That's because Ghana wasn't just a location. It was the central gear in AFRICOM's regional machine. Losing it would mean scrambling logistics, losing regional access, and facing the daunting prospect of reduced surveillance over some of the most unstable areas in Africa. You see, years of quiet military expansion had culminated in something unsustainable. U.S. Special Forces had conducted training missions. Drones had flown reconnaissance routes. Intelligence stations had been established, all with Ghana as a cooperative host. But the deeper issue was the lack of transparency. Ghanaian authorities had little real-time insight into what exactly was happening at some of these installations. The Mahama administration's move suggested that something had crossed a red line, perhaps an intelligence breach, perhaps a betrayal of trust, or perhaps simply the weight of long-building resentment finally collapsing the relationship. It wasn't just a shift in policy. It was a message to every African nation. You don't need to host someone else's war to ensure your own peace. Interestingly, the origins of that resentment go back years. In 2018, Ghana signed the now infamous Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States. On the surface, it was a military partnership. In reality, it gave U.S. personnel wide-ranging privileges like unrestricted access to certain installations, permission to build facilities without Ghanaian oversight, immunity from local prosecution, and even the right to carry arms on Ghanaian soil. To many, it read like a military occupation deal dressed in diplomatic clothing. And the fallout was immediate. Civil society groups, journalists, opposition parties, and student unions erupted in protest. Massive demonstrations filled the streets of Accra. The outrage wasn't just about the military aspect. It was about what the deal symbolized. That Ghana, a sovereign democratic state, had allowed itself to become a forward operating base for a foreign superpower. At that time, the government defended the deal by pointing to counterinsurgency training, access to U.S. military technology, and joint peacekeeping exercises. But the damage to public trust was done. Many Ghanaians felt they had been excluded from the decision. Parliament barely debated it. No public referendum was held. It felt imposed, not negotiated. Years later, rumors began to swirl about what was actually happening on those U.S. military sites. Independent journalists reported alleged surveillance activities that went far beyond what had been publicly agreed upon. Intelligence sources claimed that U.S. assets in Ghana were collecting data not just on regional threats, but possibly even on Ghanaian officials and institutions. Those reports were never confirmed, but they didn't have to be. The perception alone was enough to create a storm. By early 2025, President Mahama was receiving briefings from his national security team. According to insiders, a classified report landed on his desk that confirmed long-standing suspicions that foreign operatives were running programs that Ghana had not authorized. Communications were being intercepted. Strategic data was being handled off the books. The report reportedly included hard evidence, possibly satellite imagery, internal memos, or intercepted transmissions. That was the turning point. One official who was in the room described it plainly. The president looked at the file, stood up, and said, "That's it." It was no longer a question of whether Ghana should push back. It became a matter of dignity. The deal had become toxic. The partnership, once justified in the name of regional peace, had morphed into a security risk. And for a leader committed to restoring sovereignty, there was only one logical path left. Yet the choice wasn't easy. The U.S. remains a powerful ally, and Ghana has benefited from military aid, training, and diplomatic clout. But the cost had become too high, not in money, but in control, transparency, and national pride. By closing the bases, Mahama wasn't just responding to the classified report. He was closing a chapter of foreign dependency. The long-standing friction had become a fire, and the only way to extinguish it was to end the deal entirely. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Ghana's defiance wasn't just a domestic decision. It was a signal flare, igniting momentum that had already begun building across the continent. The shock value of Mahama's announcement lay not only in the immediate rejection of U.S. military involvement, but in what it represented, a broader continental awakening. In the aftermath of Ghana's speech, it became clear that this wasn't just about one nation reclaiming its sovereignty. It was about something larger, the unraveling of Western military influence in Africa. And Ghana, as a constitutional democracy, not a junta, not a crisis state, made that message more powerful than any coup or rebellion. And across the continent, we have already seen evidence of this shift. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had expelled French troops after widespread civilian anger over their presence and a lack of tangible improvement in security. These governments framed their actions as rejections of neo-colonial influence. But when Ghana, with its long-standing diplomatic posture and democratic legitimacy, took the same step, it proved this wasn't about ideology or regime type. It was about agency. What unites these actions is a collective frustration, a deep disillusionment with foreign troops operating under the pretense of protecting Africa, while often making things worse. So far, the presence of Western forces hasn't neutralized extremist groups like Boko Haram, ISGS, or Al-Shabaab. In fact, many critics argue that it has made countries more vulnerable, painting them as collaborators and creating targets for insurgent retaliation. For years, African states accepted Western military partnerships in exchange for funding, training, and logistics. But now, They are asking hard questions. What have we gained? At what cost? Who is really in control? Ghana's language, especially phrases like, "We will not allow our territory to be used for operations we do not control," speaks to a larger continental fatigue. Now, African nations are increasingly unwilling to carry the burden of external conflicts or serve as launchpads for proxy wars. Add to this the emergence of alternative powers. China offers infrastructure without moral lectures. Russia brings defense equipment and military trainers without tying them to governance demands. Even middle powers like Turkey and India are making inroads with investments and technology exchanges. Suddenly, Africa is not trapped between former colonial powers and dependency. It has options, and African citizens are responding. In Nigeria, youth-led civil society organizations began petitioning lawmakers to revisit the country's security deals. In Senegal, opposition figures openly questioned France's continued military presence. Ghana had spoken, but the continent was echoing back. That echo has real political weight. Within ECOWAS, diplomats are now reportedly reviewing defense frameworks signed over the last 15 years. There is rising pressure to recalibrate regional security around African-led institutions, not foreign military architectures. Ghana's break with the U.S. military was the spark, but it fell on a forest already dry with anger and ready to ignite. And this panics the United States. Because for U.S. strategic planners, Ghana was never just another base. It was the final bastion in a region slipping out of reach. After years of watching France get pushed out of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, U.S. commanders believed Ghana would be the safe zone, the hub where AFRICOM could still operate, gather intelligence, and maintain stability in the Sahel and Gulf of Guinea. But Mahama's announcement sent that entire blueprint into crisis mode. Inside AFRICOM's regional command centers, panic set in. Losing Ghana meant losing a critical node for surveillance, air refueling, and rapid response. It disrupted flight paths, intelligence sharing pipelines, and special forces training rotations. According to leaked defense briefings, AFRICOM began redrawing operational maps within 48 hours of the speech. More worrying for U.S. diplomats was the optics of the decision. Ghana isn't a failed state or a coup-born regime. It's a democracy with strong institutions and a reputation for diplomatic balance. If Ghana says no, openly and proudly, what's to stop others from following? Therefore, Washington quickly shifted into damage control. Publicly, U.S. officials issued bland statements about respecting Ghana's sovereignty and seeking dialogue. But behind the scenes, conversations were far more intense. Lawmakers floated the idea of punitive economic measures, including a review of Ghana's status under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which gives tariff-free access to U.S. markets. There were whispers about pausing aid. Pressure on Ghanaian diplomats mounted. But this is where the U.S. faces a dangerous paradox. Retaliating proves Ghana's point. If foreign partnerships are truly equal, then Ghana has every right to say no. If, however, punishment follows Ghana's refusal, it exposes what critics have long said, that U.S. cooperation often masks control through dependency. And Ghana isn't the only one watching. Other African states are paying attention to how the U.S. treats dissent. If Mahama is punished economically for prioritizing sovereignty, it could trigger a continent-wide backlash. On the other hand, if the U.S. does nothing, it may invite others to break ties without fear. For the Trump administration, it's a lose-lose dilemma. And it's made worse by the reality that the West's global dominance is no longer guaranteed. Multipolarity has arrived, and Africa knows it. That's why the panic isn't just logistical. Washington is losing the narrative, and maybe, for the first time, the entire continent with it. What do you think? Is this the end of U.S. military control over African soil? What secret did Ghana uncover that made the United States shut it all down overnight? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on the fact that the West cannot hold power over Africa if African countries end the military bases and operations that give actual power to the West. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.